So tonight's theme is Dark Night of the Soul, and it really was calling out to me this week as I realized that I've been going through a little bit of a dark night stage. Um, but just so I'm just going to be talking about Dark Night of the Soul, my experience of it, a little bit historical experience with some other spiritual teachers, perhaps. And then hopefully my intention is to prepare each and every one of us to be able to recognize when we're in dark night stages, and then of course how to work with them skillfully. So when I first started this particular practice, mindfulness, some of you know my story. I started it meditating to alleviate high anxiety, chronically really high anxiety. And it worked. So I was like, oh, this is great. And then, so my motivation was to keep the anxiety levels down at bay. And then as my practice continued on for several years, then I found out that this practice was actually a spiritual practice rooted in Buddhism. And the promise of Buddhism was to alleviate any suffering, or to eventually alleviate my suffering. And I was like, oh, okay, well, it's done this much so far. So let me really take this path to as far as I can take it in this lifetime. I was very excited about it. So I started going on a lot of Buddhist meditation retreats. And the deeper I went in my own daily practice and retreat practice, the new layers of a lot of fear and dark kind of energies were arising, and I was very excited every time I uncovered some new vein of whatever it was, every time I had a new insight. So I was passionate and I was excited about my practice. I was engaged. I couldn't wait for my next. I usually had several retreats lined up each year. Looking forward to my excavation process to get to the root of all suffering and then be free. Right? So it was a very exciting process for a while. I think 5 years I was just meditating without going on retreat, and then I started going on retreats. That was probably about 8 or 10 years I was doing that. And then I went on like a 10-day retreat, and I had a really lot of deep insights, opening up to amazing light and love and knowing my true source and all this stuff, which was great. Before then, though, I went through a really dark period where I thought I wasn't going to survive. And but then I got into this really light, beautiful, peaceful, aware, insightful place, wise place. And then I went home, right? And then I went through my daily life, but then I fell into this deep, dark place. But I didn't realize it. I thought it was my life. I thought it was my work. I thought it was my husband. I thought it was, the economy, the opportunities. But so for a year and a half, I really struggled. I suffered terribly. I could barely meditate. Every time I did meditate, my mind was racing all over the place. I was highly anxious. I had a lot of hopelessness and helplessness, and my usual 45-minute daily sits to a 45-minute to an hour went to about 20, 15, 20, 25 minutes. That's all I could tolerate because it was like sitting on hot coals. It was so difficult. I quit going on any retreats, but I was like, okay, this is really bad. And then one day, after about a year and a half into this whole thing, a lot of despair, a lot of, it was just a dark, terrible depression. It was really rough. And then I was talking to a fellow practitioner that I had gone on retreats with in the past who contacted me, another deep practitioner. Said, how was your practice? How are you doing? I haven't talked to you for a while. And I said, Yeah, I'm barely able to practice each day. So I told him about what was going on, and he said, "Oh my gosh, you're dark nighting it." And I said, "What?" He said, "You're in a dark night." And I said, "What do you mean?" So he said, "Oh, you need to go back on a long retreat and get out of this. You're in a dark night of the soul stage." And I said, "What?" Because all those years I've been going on retreat, not one Buddhist teacher mentioned dark night of the soul stages, right? Not one Buddhist teacher mentioned that you can get stuck in this place that can be very dangerous and difficult to deal with. And if and when you do go through a stage like this, you need some guidance and support of a good Buddhist teacher. Oh, okay. Thank goodness my friend knew more about this than I did. So I went back, and I went on a 2-week-long retreat, and I got some guidance. I believe was it Jack Kornfield? I don't remember which one it was, but I got some guidance to get out of this dark night of this soul period. So I'll teach you a little bit more about what that looks like according to Buddhist teachings. What is this dark night of the soul? And why is it important? Why is it even helpful to go through a dark night of the soul stage? And yeah, so mindfulness. I've heard that people doing MBSR or special mindfulness courses can get launched into a dark night of the soul stage. It can be so it's pretty irresponsible to continue marketing mindfulness like some self-improvement cure-all without qualifying that dark stuff can come up. Not always, but it can come up for people. Like the quote says, "Where without darkness there is no light," right? And sometimes the spiritual practice, it's not always wonderful. Sometimes it can be really rather relaxing and wonderful, but other times it can bring up some of the darkest, most painful parts of our psyches up into our awareness, to be seen, to be heard, to be cleansed, to be processed, right? That's what this dark night of the soul is. It's bringing up, it's a stage that we go through with deep practice that brings up stuff that needs to be purified. The Buddha called this practice mental purification practice, mental purification. So I liken this stage of going through the dark night as, and by the way, it shouldn't have lasted a year and a half. If I had a good teacher, if I had any awareness of this, I would have immediately known what to do, gone back on retreat, worked through it. It could have lasted just a few weeks, right, instead of a year and a half. But I struggled for a year and a half not knowing. I went to Willoughby, Britain. She's a psychiatrist, I believe. Yeah, she's a professor of psychiatry and human behavior at Brown University Medical School. And she started a project called the Dark Night Project because she was into the Buddhist teachings, she was going on retreats, and then she herself fell into this really dark pit of depression and despair that she didn't understand. And it was really scary. And she went and talked to Jack Kornfield and I think Joseph Goldstein and got some support and help to get her through this dark night, her own dark night of the soul. And then she realized, she started researching, finding out that many practitioners over the years have fallen into these kinds of dark nights, but not knowing what's going on for them. So she I think she's written books. She's written a lot of articles. She's been documenting. In fact, I met her and told her about my experience. Gave her the details, wrote them all out, and gave them to her. So she's been publicizing the possible adverse effects of contemplative practices. So the Dark Night of the Soul can be traced back to a 16th century Spanish poem by the mystic San Juan de la Cruz, or Saint John of the Cross. There are a lot of roots from the Christian traditions, especially one's individual spiritual crisis. Maybe you may have heard of that. In the course of their union with God, they have this spiritual crisis where suddenly God, who was right there with them, that they had this wonderful connection with, suddenly they don't have this, oh, where did God go? They lose that connection. And so they go through this fit of despair, feeling like they're rootless, they're groundless, they no longer have the support and love of God. And there's very similar stories, dark night stories, that range from the Kundalini, pagan, occult, Buddhist, of course, Jewish, Islamic practices. So if you study all of these, you can find very similar, these major contemplative traditions have these spiritual crises that people can go through. Here's F. Scott Fitzgerald. He said, in a real dark night of the soul, it is always 3 o'clock in the morning. I love that. Because you know what it's like when you wake up in the middle of the night and it's 3 o'clock in the morning and the mind is racing and you can't fall asleep and there's high anxiety and despair and the mind blows everything out of proportion at 3 in the morning. That was my experience of what it was like all the time. Apparently Mother Teresa had a profound union with Christ, which she lost. And then she went through her own dark night stage where she reports in her writings as going through a lot of doubt, loneliness, abandonment. She felt abandoned by Jesus, by God. So if you want to study it, there's so many things. And there are a lot of quotes like Mark 15:34 in the Bible. My God, why have you forsaken me? This is Jesus's words. He went through his own dark night of the soul. Yeah. So in Buddhist tradition, sometimes it's called falling into the pit of the void. Falling into the pit of the void. And it entails an authentic and irreversible insight into emptiness and no self or not self. Right? Yeah, and there are a lot of interpretations of what happens during this time. A lot of different theories that that the psyche or the ego mind is not willing to let go and is freaking out and is doing one last stance of don't you dare, because it feels the dissolution of the self starts to happen and the ego starts to freak out. That's one of the theories. But I like the theory that, there's stages. There are these 12 stages of insight that we go through, and the 6 of the stages are the dark night stages before enlightenment. And according to this Theravada insight tradition, we cycle through these 12 stages over and over and over again through our life and get a little bit more enlightened every time we cycle through these stages, right? But the big dark night of the soul is the first time we really, if you have one, not everyone goes through a really deep, dark night of the soul stage. A lot of people don't. Willoughby seems to have been pointing to her theory that if we've had a lot of trauma in our past, that the dark night of the soul brings up all of that, can be much more intense if we've had trauma, brings it all up. I like to think of it as being when my parents have had a vinyl pool. Anybody had a vinyl pool before? An in-ground pool? And every year we would take these brushes and go along the top of the vinyl. It would get all cruddy, dirty. And we would scrub the vinyl down at the top of the pool. And all the dirt, mold or whatever that darkness was in the vinyl would come off of the side of the pool and go into the water because we were scrubbing it. And then the filters would take that dark sediment that we're on and filter it through, and then eventually it would go from brown looking, muddy looking pool to clear again, right? So that's what I think is going on with the dark night of the soul. I believe from my own experience that the psyche brings up all of this darkness that needs to be cleansed, purified, filtered. And what is our filtering process? It's our loving, compassionate, mindful awareness. So I'm going to tell you the 6 stages, a little bit about each one. And according to the tradition of insight tradition, we're supposed to have certain lessons that we learn going through the dark night of the soul. And the lessons that we're supposed to learn are the 3 characteristics, the 3 primary characteristics of all phenomena, which is suffering, dukkha, not self, and impermanence. So we go through several stages. Then we hit this stage when we first get into the dark night called Dissolution Stage. This is when meditating starts to get hard. And our concentration before this was wonderful. We could follow our object for sustained, long, restful periods of time. Now all of a sudden it's like, what? I can't follow my object for very long. We get lost in stories and fantasies. Our posture kind of gets worse, or we start to feel a little bit of physical pain. Daniel Ingram, who wrote a book about a lot of this, called it the couch potato stage, because we lose our motivation, start to lose our motivation for practice, for spiritual practice. Then the next stage, which I found miserable, was the fear stage. Fear is something you're easily startled. You get kind of paranoid. You think people are, for me, I thought someone was going to kill me. I had terrible dreams, nightmares, where people were chasing me or going after me. So there are a lot of physical distortions during this time. So when you're sitting meditating, you can feel like your body's like this in a contorted state, but then when you open your eyes, you're not. It's kind of weird. So there's a lot of anxiety and fear, and unsettling visions can happen while you're meditating. Like you'll be meditating, suddenly have a vision of someone coming to maybe stab you in the back or something. It's, at least that's what happened with me. So that's the second stage. The third stage is misery. Sounds pretty miserable, doesn't it? So during the misery stage, there's unshakable sadness and loss. We start to really understand impermanence and suffering. These characteristics start tearing down any preconceived notions we had of ourselves and the world. We start to see that there's nothing we can cling to. Everything we thought that we use for security and to feel safe and to feel okay starts to fall away. And so then we start grieving, right? And attention continually grows more panoramic. So before it was smaller, now it's like, oh, everything seems so, So don't worry, you get out of these stages, by the way, and you come into this amazing light. But so the next stage is disgust. We go from misery to disgust, as if misery wasn't bad enough. right? Now disgust, we're like, I've had enough of this. This is, you can't focus your attention on anything for like 1 second. And during this time, it's easy to get caught in stories. There's a general feeling of disappointment, torment, frustration. The repetitive mind is like churning, churning, churning. And then you just become more and more unsatisfactory, more and more dissatisfaction. And you realize that the world is just this impermanent, dissatisfying place, right? That's the disgust stage. And then there's the desire for deliverance. This is where you say, okay, now please, somebody take me away from all this. I want this to be done. I can't take it anymore. So there's a longing for release, for deliverance. We tend to start looking for solutions in our ordinary lives. Like, maybe if I get a divorce, things will be better. Maybe if I get a different job, things will be better. We're hypersensitive. We're easily stimulated by sounds and our senses. And noises are much louder, right? So everything just seems so obtrusive. And there can be a lot more frustration. Powerful urges to, you can choose to end it all here. Hopefully you're not suicidal. I wasn't. But some people can just give up their meditation practices. So I think this is the stage, it's called the rolling up of the mat stage, where people say, to hell with this spiritual practice. I'm done. This hasn't gotten me anywhere. I'm just getting worse. Because people don't understand that this is a normal process of the dark night, right? So then when you get towards the dark night stage, you start to come to the reobservation, the wall. It's like all these other stages, misery, disgust, fear, desire for deliverance, they all manifest at one time. So this is like shaking your whole mind, body, and heart to pieces, right? And see, I didn't know that this stuff was normal, so I was fighting it all. And the more I fought it, the worse it got, right? So intense aversion to meditating, high levels of restlessness, anxiety, confusion. This is when most people quit, for sure. The mind just won't shut up. There's a lot of disenchantment with life, with sex, with money, things that used to bring us pleasure, relationships, morality. We just don't care, right? A lot of overwhelm. So I was feeling just totally overwhelmed. And for me, I felt frozen, like I couldn't make a decision. So there was a lot of self-doubt. I just felt frozen, like I can't do anything. I'll just barely get through each day. People who have, during this stage, if they have mental illness, they can have a psychotic break during this time. Their narcissistic personality, they can have delusions of grandeur. People can fall into clinical depression. I wrote an article about this once, and I had several people from all over the world emailing me saying, my son, I think, is stuck in the dark night. I've been really depressed, and what can I do? And so I've always given them some advice and then sent them to Willoughby, Britain. But yeah, it's this grief and this dissolution and the sadness and the despair. All of this is related to the death of the ego, right? The hold that the ego had on us before is no longer there. So what we really want to do is we want to get really curious about each and every one of these stages, to not fight them, to see what is the gift in this stage. What is it that my contracted small little mind is afraid to see or afraid to let go of? And there are times when you feel like your whole body is just literally being shook and when you open your eyes, you imagine that and then when there's stillness. Yeah, it's least this was my experience, but I've met so many practitioners, deep practitioners, who have not gone through, or if they did, it was such a short blip. So if you find yourself in one of these stages, get some help. Call me. I'll help you get through it. Go on a retreat. That's one of the best ways to do deep, sustained practice. If what's really sad is a lot of people start to go through this process, and like I said, they quit. They say, "Oh, yeah, I don't like this spirit," because they were looking for happiness. They're looking for bliss. They're looking for peacefulness. They're not looking for their darkest, deepest stuff to, to arise and have to be felt and seen. So just realize if it starts to happen, this is a good thing, right? You are actually making some headway on the path. You're in the purification process. You're not losing your mind. Right? So if there's high anxiety, when you haven't had a lot of problem with anxiety in the past, then you might want to try to meditate your way through the stage instead of get on medication if it's tolerable. Whatever you do, don't stop meditating. It's the most important thing that you need to do, even if you can't follow one breath, right? Then you can make the chaos and the fear and the confusion and the busy mind can become your object. Just watch the craziness happening in the heart, mind, and body. Yeah, and open, like I said, open fully to each stage. You might, when it gets really hard, if you like to do labeling or noting practice, start noting everything. Oh, despair, desire to give up, hatred, anger, can't stand this anymore, aversion. And do your best to not take any of it personally. It's not personal, right? And of course, get the support of your Sangha. Here's Michael Hawkins said, though it may be counterintuitive to a person to plunge headlong into the mouth of her or his most frightening demons, this is exactly what is required of the skillful and rigorous contemplative. Attack, as if each meditation is the last one. Open to whatever the dark night is throwing at us at this time. Release from our resistance, letting go of our attachment to that resistance. One foot in front of the other, forward into the dark night, until a moment arises when that feeling of aloneness and helplessness is replaced by a knowingness that we were never truly alone, that some agency of transformation has been assisting, guiding, and arranging our journey in an orderly manner, propelling us toward the other shore. So the good news is, once we get through the dark night of the soul, we open up into this amazingly spacious, blissful, peaceful, empty place. Sometimes experience is full of love, our true nature, our true source. We experience ourselves as everything and nothing at the same time. At least that was my experience each time. And then we're that much more free. It was all worth it. Cleaning the side of the pool, scrubbing, filtering, it was all worth it. So we continue to cycle through these cycles through our practice every day. Some people cycle, through the stages once a week or once a month or once every year. But each time we cycle through the dark night stages after the first really intense time, if you have an intense time, you may not, it gets easier, right? So what I often do, I'll be like, oh, I'm dark nighting. Yeah, I can feel this bad dreams last night. I must be in the fear stage. Oh yeah, this is getting old. I'm in the desire for deliverance stage. So, but it's all manageable and it's hopeful. And it's hopeful because it's a purification process, right? It's a natural process. Like the seasons change, the cycles of the seasons, the cycles, if they're astrological cycles, there's um, medical cycles that we cycle through, or sleep phases. Everything that we look at in nature in some way is cycling, right? Um, and so is our psyche, or whatever this human experience is. Um, and it has a profound wisdom that we don't, the human mind doesn't necessarily understand. Our only job is to keep showing up mindfully for each and every one of these cycles in our lives, internally, externally, cycles of development. Here's Ryokan, 1758 to 1831. When there is beauty, there is ugliness. When something is right, something else is wrong. Knowledge and ignorance depend on each other. It has been like this since the beginning. How could it be otherwise now? Wanting to toss out one and hold on to the other makes for a ridiculous comedy. You must still deal with everything, ever changing, even when you say it's wonderful. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for your practice and your wisdom.